Most equestrians have a secret that our horses don't really like most of what we ask them to do in work. And that's the reason, the real reason, why we use a whip. I don't think anybody wants to hit the horse or wants to be constantly reminding the horse and driving the horse. But yet here we are, because we're using it to treat symptoms over and over and over and over again, and we never really get to the deeper cause. Trying to solve movement problems as if they were behavior issues. This is the first video in a little mini-series I'm going to do, ways to stop using a whip, but without sacrificing the horse's movement. The way we're going to get rid of the whip and yet not sacrifice the horse's movements, the reasons that we're using the whip, is by solving a different and better problem. That we might be telling ourselves we're only using it for cues, but in reality, we're also using it to, quote, back up our aids or back up our cues, which means that we're also using it as a threat. That if the horse doesn't listen to your light aids, your light cues, you tap him with the whip. And if he doesn't listen to that, then maybe a pop with the whip. The next reason would be driving the horse forward. Almost everyone lunges with a lunge whip, something driving the horse from behind. And again, I don't think anyone actually wants to do that. And then we've got punishment and corrections. Using the whip to back up a cue or an aid can become a form of punishment because we're punishing the horse or correcting the horse for ignoring the lighter cue, the lighter aid. So you didn't respond, you didn't respond, you didn't respond. Whack, now we're getting after him. So how can we keep the tactile cues but use it the way most people claim they're using it and never, ever, ever, ever as a threat? So the question I pose to people all the time is, if that's true, if you are really only using it as a tactile cue, then there are other things that you can use besides a whip, like a long feather. Something that can't really sting the horse, that can't ever be used to threaten the horse, but can still allow you to just have touch awareness on the horse. But what so many people find out is that when they try that, if they just stop having a whip with them, that it turns out they still needed the whip. Even people who never ever have to hit the horse, somewhere, someone did hit the horse so that the whip still works as a threat. So we want the performance to be coming from the mover, from the athlete, from the dancer, from the performer, in this case, from the horse. And the problem is, if we're using the whips, we're never really going to get there. And the reason we're in this trap is because, again, we're solving the wrong problem. We're trying to solve this movement problem as a behavior problem. This isn't a behavior problem that the horse keeps needing reminders. This is a movement issue. And we're not ever going to be able to solve it with threats, because the moment we're using threats, it means we've already decided the horse doesn't own these movements, can't or won't do these movements. So then we're just in this fight with his nervous system. So in this video, I'm just going to talk about this idea of getting the horse forward in front of the leg. So we're going to play the 5 whys game. Let's imagine someone says, "Why are you using that whip with the horse?" And the person says, "He needs to be in front of the leg." Why does he need to be in front of the leg? Because if he's not in front of the leg, then he's not channeling his energy forward into the bit. Why do we care? Why do we want him to be channeling his energy forward into the bit? That's the only way that we can then have this connection to influence the horse's movement, to get him to lift his back, to start being less on the forehand, more agile, and in a healthier position to carry the rider. Okay. Now we got there. Using the whip to keep getting the horse forward in front of the leg because that's what gets us to this other thing we really want, which is this healthier carriage in the horse, more agility, lifted back. Then why don't we just solve that? We don't need to solve getting the horse forward in front of the leg if we have a completely different way to solve the real problem that we're trying to solve in movement, which is the better movement and self-carriage and agility. If we can do that without using the whip, then all of those reasons for using the whip for these responses just goes away. It doesn't mean that we just abandon our goals or our desires to help the horse move in a certain way, although some of that changes. But it means that we have a different way of achieving that doesn't require force, that doesn't require threats, that doesn't require reminders. But I think we all have this feeling that it's not fun when the horse doesn't want to do it and we're having to threaten him. Now, that's not a super easy transition, but the worst thing we can do is kind of sort of just try to use it less, but it's still there. The moment we give up threats completely, that's when the horse starts to be able to transform, because now his nervous system perceives the entire activity that we're doing in a completely different way. Now we are able to change it from we're dealing with a behavior, we want the horse to do the thing we want him to do, and we're using pressure and release. Now we change it to a movement puzzle that the horse is trying to solve, and that is profoundly different. When you switch away from threats and instead to movement puzzles, it opens up the possibility for movements that you would never have gotten by threatening the horse. A big part of those I've already talked about in my previous videos. The one on the crunches, the self-half halt, bits versus bitless, I talk about it. The straightness training, I talk about it. If you're still using a whip, you might still feel like you need something to communicate with the horse, which is totally fine. So you could use, again, a long feather. I got some really long feathers on Amazon. You can get them at craft stores. A feather duster, any kind of household duster. It's truly just more proprioceptive stimulation, wakes up some mechanoreceptors, but not as a threat that can invoke a pain response. You could use a foam sword. You could use a foam pool noodle. You could use a stick or even a whip with a big piece of foam on it. Now, I don't usually start out using a whip with foam on it until a horse has actually transitioned away from seeing anything that looks like a whip as something that's going to hit me, possibly. Some horses will perceive a whip for quite some time as something that is a threat. And this is where people who haven't really had much horse experience do so much better, because they don't have these automatic habits. You see people with a lot of natural horsemanship experience, they'll be leading the horse, and their hand is behind them with the stick, and possibly a stick and string, whatever it is they're using, right? Just to keep reminding the horse, stay with me, keep going, keep coming with me, right? This constant reminders. So sometimes people will be holding a stick with foam, and they won't even know they're still holding it like a driving aid. Or the horse is going around, whether it's at liberty or on a lunge line, and they're holding the pool noodle as if it was a driving aid. People will say, yeah, I use a lunge whip, but I've never touched the horse with it. Well, then why are you using it? Right? Just stop. Just put it down. Just don't use it then. So if you feel like you still need it there, even though you don't use it, it's because you're using it as a threat, something to keep the horse, wanting to move away from it. Or, of course, we're using movement science where we want the horse to move toward things, not run away from things. So just don't use it at all. But the problem is when you're still using things in a, quote, driving way, even if you will never, ever again hit a horse, we still are stuck in that movement trap where we're still trying to influence the horse to do movements by how we're manipulating his forward energy from behind, instead of saying, we need a completely different way to help the horse want to move forward. And as long as we're driving, we're never going to have that happen. So you kind of have to go cold turkey with that. Now, so go have fun.
Only as good as my bad days. Only as sure as my doubt. Life is a spectrum. I give my objections and fall on each side of the line. Skeptic on weekdays, it blinds me. Then on the weekends I'm fine. I have opinions if anyone's listening. I'm lost on the other side.
Don't eat it.